They say a mother's love knows no bounds, that we'll sacrifice everything for our children. Well, I did that. I gave my son the woman he wanted to marry, even when my gut told me she was trouble. I gave him my blessing when he asked me to move in with them after my fall. I gave him my house, my independence, my savings, and my trust. What did I get in return? Bruises on my arms that I had to hide under long sleeves in July. A locked bedroom door that kept me prisoner in what used to be my own guest room. Meals that got smaller and colder as the months went by. And threats whispered in my ear when my son wasn't looking. Threats that if I ever told Daniel what was really happening, I'd disappear and nobody would ever find me. For 5 years, I stayed quiet. For 5 years, I took the shoves, the cruel words, the isolation from my grandchildren. For 5 years, I played the part of the grateful mother-in-law who was so lucky to have such a caring daughter-in-law taking care of her. But there's something Julia didn't know about me. Something she couldn't see past my gray hair and wrinkled hands, and the way I shuffled around the house trying to stay out of her way. I wasn't just some helpless old woman. I was a survivor. I buried a husband when I was 38 and raised a boy into a man all by myself. I'd worked 2 jobs and still made it to every baseball game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I'd fought battles she couldn't even imagine. And when she pushed me too far, when she made the mistake of thinking I was weak and broken and defeated, that's when I stopped being afraid. That's when I remembered who I really was. That's when I made my plan. My name is Helen Marie Patterson, and I'm 76 years old. I've lived through segregation in Mississippi, watched my husband die of cancer when Daniel was only 12, and worked nights at the diner while cleaning office buildings during the day just to keep food on our table. I thought I'd seen the worst life could throw at me. I was wrong. For 5 long years, I lived as a prisoner in a house that should have been my sanctuary. The woman who called me Mom in front of my son became my warden the moment he left for work each morning. Julia had perfected the art of cruelty with a smile of violence wrapped in concern for my fragile state. She convinced Daniel I was getting forgetful, that I needed supervision, that I might hurt myself if left alone. Meanwhile, she was the one leaving fingerprint bruises on my wrists and telling me exactly how she'd make me disappear if I ever opened my mouth. But Julia made one critical mistake. She underestimated a woman who'd spent decades learning how to survive, how to plan, how to wait for exactly the right moment to strike back. While she thought she was breaking me down day by day, I was gathering evidence. While she believed her threats had silenced me forever, I was building a case that would destroy everything she'd worked so hard to control. See, there's a difference between being quiet and being defeated. Julia never learned that difference. And by the time she figured it out, it was already too late. The trap I'd spent months setting was about to snap shut, and this time she was going to be the one who disappeared. Before I continue, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Let me tell you how this all started, because the beginning matters. I was born in Meridian, Mississippi in 1949, the youngest of 6 children in a house where love was measured in portions of cornbread and hand-me-down dresses. My daddy worked the cotton fields, and my mama took in washing for the white families in town. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and more importantly, we had spine. My mama used to say, "Helen, you can bend in the wind, but don't you ever let anyone break you." I carried those words with me through everything that came after. I married my high school sweetheart, James, when I was 19. He was a good man, steady and kind, with calloused hands and dreams of owning his own garage someday. We had Daniel 2 years later, and for a while, life felt like it was finally going our way. James got his garage, Daniel was healthy and smart, and I thought we'd grow old together watching our boy become a man. But cancer doesn't care about your plans. It took James when Daniel was 12, leaving me with a broken heart, a stack of medical bills, and a son who needed his mama to be strong enough for both parents. So I became strong enough. I worked double shifts at the diner, cleaned offices until my knees ached, and somehow still made it to every single one of Daniel's baseball games. I helped him with homework at midnight after my second job, drove him to college on borrowed money, and cheered louder than anyone when he graduated with his engineering degree. He was my pride, my purpose, my proof that all those years of struggle had been worth something. Daniel moved to Atlanta for work and met Julia at some company party. She was beautiful in that sharp, polished way that comes from money and good schools. Blonde hair, always perfectly styled, clothes that cost more than I used to make in a month, and a smile that could light up a room when she wanted it to. When Daniel brought her home for the first time, she was charming. She complimented my cooking, asked about my life in Mississippi, and even helped with the dishes. But I watched her eyes when she thought nobody was looking, and they stayed cold even when her mouth was smiling. There was something calculating about the way she sized up my little house, my old furniture, the framed pictures of Daniel's childhood covering every surface. I kept my concerns to myself. Daniel was happy. And after everything he'd been through losing his father so young, I wanted him to have that happiness. When he announced they were getting married, I smiled and hugged her and welcomed her to our family. When he asked if I'd be willing to move in with them after I took that bad fall down my front steps and spent 2 days in the hospital, I said yes. He was worried about me living alone, and Julia seemed so concerned, so eager to take care of me. That's how I ended up selling the house where I'd raised my son, packing up 40 years of memories, and moving into their guest bedroom. Julia helped me pack, her smile never wavering, her voice full of excitement about how wonderful it would be to have me there. But I should have paid attention to that moment when Daniel went to load boxes in the truck and she held up my wedding photo, the one of James and me dancing at our reception. She looked at it for a long time, then carefully placed it in a box marked storage instead of bedroom, like I'd asked. She smiled when Daniel was watching, but her eyes were ice when he wasn't. I learned that lesson on my very first morning in their house when she served Daniel fresh coffee and warm biscuits, then handed me instant coffee in a chip mug and told me there was cereal in the cabinet if I wanted breakfast. When Daniel asked why I looked tired, Julia was quick to explain that I'd had trouble sleeping in a new place, that it was probably hard adjusting. She rubbed my shoulder as she said it, but her fingers pressed just hard enough to remind me who was in charge now. The first month, Julia was still testing the waters, seeing how far she could push before I'd push back. It started small. She'd forget to mention when my friend Ruth called from Mississippi. She'd tell Daniel I'd been confused about what day it was, or that I'd left the stove on when I hadn't touched it in hours. Little lies that painted me as forgetful, unreliable, a woman whose mind was slipping away piece by piece. Daniel worked long hours at the engineering firm, sometimes 12-hour days when they had big projects. Julia had quit her job after they got married, said she wanted to focus on taking care of the house, and me. What she really wanted to focus on was making sure I knew exactly where I stood in her world. The morning Daniel left for his first business trip, Julia's mask came off completely. I was making myself tea in the kitchen when she walked in, still in her silk pajamas, and looked at me like I was a cockroach that had wandered in from outside. "Let's get something straight, Helen," she said, her voice flat and cold. "This is my house, my kitchen, my husband. You're here because Daniel feels sorry for you, but don't think for 1 second that means you matter to me. You're nothing but a burden we're stuck with until you die." I stood there holding my teacup, feeling like I'd been slapped. This wasn't the woman who'd helped me pack my belongings, who'd promised to take good care of me. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd been hiding behind Daniel's back for months. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "I thought we were family." Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family? You're a relic from Daniel's past that he's too guilty to get rid of. But don't worry, I'll help him see reason eventually." That's when I knew my life had changed forever. The house I'd moved into thinking it would be my sanctuary had become my prison, and the woman I'd called daughter was going to be my guard. Julia was smart about her cruelty. She never left marks where Daniel could see them, never raised her voice when he was home. She'd wait until his car pulled out of the driveway before she'd start talking to me, like I was dirt on her shoe. She called me senile when I forgot where I'd put my reading glasses. She called me a burden when I asked if she needed help with anything around the house. And when I mentioned that I might like to visit my old neighbors back in Mississippi, she told me I was one accident away from a nursing home, and that maybe that's where I belonged anyway. The phone calls stopped coming through. Julia started taking messages, but somehow she always forgot to give them to me. My old church friends, my neighbors, even Ruth, they all just disappeared from my life because Julia never told me they'd called. When I asked to use the phone to call them back, there was always a reason why I couldn't. The phone was broken. She was expecting an important call. Daniel needed the line clear for work. Then came the night I got up for a glass of water and found the refrigerator locked with a chain and padlock. When I asked Julia about it the next morning, she told me she was worried about my wandering at night, that I might eat something that would make me sick. She said it was for my own protection, but her smile told me it was about control. The worst part was watching what happened with my grandchildren. Sarah was 8 and Tommy was 5, and they used to run to me the minute they got home from school. I'd help them with homework, read them stories, make them snacks while Julia talked on the phone with her friends. But gradually, Julia started steering them away from me. She'd tell them Grandma Helen was tired, that Grandma Helen needed to rest, that they should play quietly so they wouldn't disturb me. When Sarah asked if I could help her with a school project about family history, Julia told her that Grandma Helen's memory wasn't good enough anymore, that she might tell her the wrong stories. When Tommy wanted me to read him bedtime stories like I used to, Julia explained that Grandma Helen's eyes weren't good in dim light, that she might trip and fall if she came upstairs after dark. The children started looking at me differently, like I was fragile and broken, like I might shatter if they hugged me too tight. Julia had convinced them I was failing, and children believe what the adults tell them. Gradually, they stopped coming to me for help, stopped asking me to play games, stopped seeing me as the grandmother who loved them, and started seeing me as the old woman they had to be careful around. Every day felt like another small death, another piece of who I used to be getting stripped away. And Julia watched it all happen with that same cold satisfaction, knowing she was erasing me from my own family's life one lie at a time. The first time Julia put her hands on me was a Tuesday morning in March. Daniel had left early for a meeting in Birmingham, wouldn't be back until Thursday. I was washing dishes from breakfast when Julia came into the kitchen, already dressed in her workout clothes, her face twisted with irritation. "You left water spots on the glassware again," she said, pointing to the dish rack. I looked over at the glasses I'd just dried. They looked clean to me, but I apologized anyway. "I'm sorry. I can rewash them if you'd like." "You're damn right you will." She grabbed my arm just above the elbow and squeezed hard, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin through my sweater. "And this time, do it right. I'm tired of having to fix everything you touch." The pain shot up my arm, and I gasped, trying to pull away. But her grip tightened. "Please, Julia, you're hurting me." "Good," she said, her voice quiet and deadly calm. "Maybe pain will help you remember how to do simple tasks properly." When she finally let go, I could feel the bruise forming under my sleeve. That evening, when Daniel asked why I seemed quiet at dinner, Julia was quick to explain that I'd had a difficult day, that aging was hard on me, that she was doing her best to be patient. She reached over and patted my hand as she said it, and I felt her engagement ring press against the spot where her nails had dug in that morning. After that, the physical punishment became Julia's favorite way to express her displeasure. If I left a light on in a room I wasn't using, she'd grab my wrist and twist it while explaining the importance of saving electricity. If I tracked mud on her clean floors, she'd shove me hard enough to send me stumbling, then help me steady myself while apologizing for being so clumsy as to get in my way. She had a talent for making her violence look accidental, for positioning herself as the caring daughter-in-law who was constantly having to catch her accident-prone mother-in-law before she fell. The food situation got worse too. Julia would serve Daniel Jenner's portions and give me what looked like a child-sized meal, explaining that she was helping me watch my weight, that older people didn't need as many calories. If I asked for seconds, she'd look concerned and mention that my clothes seemed to be getting tighter, that overeating was dangerous at my age. Meanwhile, she'd lock up the leftovers and anything I might snack on, claiming she was protecting me from eating things that might upset my stomach. Some days she'd forget to give me lunch entirely, then act shocked when I mentioned being hungry, wondering aloud if my memory problems were getting worse since I'd clearly forgotten eating. By evening, I'd be lightheaded and shaky, but Julia would tell Daniel I'd been tired and stressed all day, that maybe we should think about having my doctor adjust my medications. The worst was when she decided I talked too much. Julia had very specific ideas about when I should speak and when I should stay quiet, and she made sure I understood the rules. If I tried to join conversations when her friends came over, she'd find me later and explain that interrupting was rude, that I'd embarrassed her in front of people who mattered. She'd grab my shoulders hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises, and tell me that old people who couldn't control themselves belonged in places where someone could watch them constantly. But it was the threats that really broke something inside me. Late at night, when the house was dark and Daniel was sleeping, Julia would come to my room. She'd sit on the edge of my bed and speak in a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than if she'd been screaming. "You know what happens to old women who make trouble, Helen," she said one night, her face barely visible in the dim light from the hallway. "They fall downstairs. They forget to turn off gas burners. They wander outside in their nightgowns and get lost in the cold." I lay there frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, too loud. "Daniel thinks the world of me," she continued, her voice soft and sweet like she was talking to a child. "If something happened to you, something tragic and sudden, he'd need me more than ever. And who would question it? You're 76 years old. Helen, old people die. It's what they do." She leaned closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something colder. "Tell Daniel what goes on in this house when he's gone, and I'll bury you before he believes a single word. You think he'll choose his confused, senile mother over the wife he loves? Over the mother of his children? You're more foolish than I thought." Night after night, she'd come with variations of the same message. I was expendable. I was forgettable. I was one conversation away from disappearing forever, and she'd make sure it looked natural. I started writing everything down. Every insult, every shove, every threat, every meal withheld. I found an old composition notebook in a box of school supplies the children had outgrown, and I wrote in it whenever Julia left the house. I hid it in my sewing basket underneath balls of yarn and fabric scraps, figuring she'd never think to look there, since she'd made it clear that my hobbies were worthless anyway. The journal became my lifeline. Writing down what happened made it real, made it something I couldn't question later, when Julia's gaslighting had me wondering if I was actually losing my mind. I wrote about the bruises on my arms, the way she'd smile while hurting me, the exact words she used when she promised to make me disappear. Then Ruth called. It was the first phone call that got through to me in months, and only because Julia was at her yoga class and forgot to set the answering machine. Ruth had been my closest friend since we were girls in Mississippi, the one person who knew me better than anyone except James. We'd kept in touch through letters and occasional calls for decades, but I hadn't heard her voice since I'd moved in with Daniel. "Helen Marie Patterson, where the hell have you been?" she said the moment I answered. "I've called this house 15 times and left messages with that daughter-in-law of yours, but you never call back. I was starting to think you died." I started crying the second I heard her voice. All those months of holding everything inside, of pretending I was fine, of taking Julia's abuse without anyone to talk to, it all came pouring out. I told Ruth everything, whispering into the phone like a prisoner making her one aloud call. Ruth listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence before she spoke. "Honey, you're being abused. You know that, right? This isn't about you being old or confused or any of the things she's telling you. This is about her being evil. Hearing someone say it out loud, hearing Ruth name what was happening to me, felt like taking my first real breath in months. I don't know what to do. I whispered. She says she'll hurt me worse if I tell Daniel. She says she'll make me disappear. Well, she made one mistake, Ruth said, and I could hear the steel in her voice that had been there since we were girls standing up to bullies on the playground. She doesn't know about me. 2 weeks later, a package arrived for me. Julia brought it to my room with a suspicious look, clearly wondering who was sending me mail. Inside was a digital voice recorder, no bigger than a stick of gum, along with a note from Ruth written in her careful teacher's handwriting. For the stories you want to remember. Love, R. I started recording everything. Julia's morning insults while she made Daniel's breakfast. Her threats whispered in the dark. The sound of her locking the refrigerator at night, the chain rattling against the door. Her phone conversations with friends where she complained about being stuck taking care of her crazy mother-in-law who was getting worse every day. Every bruise had a name now. The finger marks on my wrist from when I'd asked if I could call the doctor about my medication. That was March 15th, recorded in both my journal and on the device. The soreness in my shoulder from when she'd shoved me into the doorframe for leaving my reading glasses on the kitchen counter, March 22nd, with her voice captured saying I needed to learn to be more careful before I really got hurt. Every scar had a memory. The cut on my arm from when she'd accidentally bumped me while I was washing knives, sending one sliding across my forearm. The burn on my hand from when she grabbed my wrist and forced it against the hot coffee pot, then apologized profusely for startling me while she was trying to help. And every recording became a weapon. Julia thought she had all the power because she had Daniel's love and trust. She thought she could erase me from my own life with no consequences, because who would believe a confused old woman over a devoted wife and mother? What she didn't know was that I was building a case against her, piece by piece, day by day. She'd underestimated the woman who'd raised a son alone, who'd survived poverty and loss and heartbreak. She'd mistaken my silence for surrender. That was going to be her biggest mistake. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday in April. Daniel was in Houston for a 3-day conference, and Julia thought I was napping in my room. I'd gotten good at pretending to sleep when I needed to listen, learn to breathe deep and steady while keeping my ears open. That afternoon, I heard Julia on the phone in the kitchen, her voice bright and animated in a way it never was when she talked to me. "No, trust me, it'll be perfect," she was saying. "Shady Oaks has an opening next month, and once she's there, we can finally have our lives back." I pressed my ear closer to the crack in my bedroom door, my heart hammering so hard I was afraid she'd hear it. "Of course Daniel doesn't know yet," she continued with a laugh. "But I've been documenting everything. Her confusion, her accidents, how she can't take care of herself anymore. Dr. Morrison will back me up about her declining mental state. I made sure to paint the right picture during her last appointment." There was a pause while whoever she was talking to responded. "The jewelry? Oh, honey, that's the best part. She's got her grandmother's pearl necklace, her wedding ring, and some other pieces that are actually worth something. Once she's in the nursing home and signs over power of attorney for her own protection, all of that becomes family assets that Daniel and I can manage. And you know how sentimental men get about their mothers. He'll probably want me to handle all the details, so he doesn't have to think about the sad parts. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. She was planning to steal everything I had left of my life before James, every piece of my history that mattered, and she was going to use Daniel's love for me to do it. The house money's already in our joint account, Julia went on. And with her Social Security and pension going straight to the nursing home fees, we'll finally be able to take that trip to Europe we've been talking about. Maybe by the lake house too. I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling. She wasn't just planning to get rid of me. She was planning to profit from it. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, every precious thing I had left from my marriage and my past. She was going to take it all, while convincing my son it was for my own good. Trust me, Sarah, by summer I'll be a free woman. No more pretending to care about some old bag who should have died years ago anyway. That night, I sat at the little desk in my room and wrote the longest entry I'd ever put in my journal. Then I took out the voice recorder Ruth had sent me and spoke directly into it, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. This is Helen Patterson, and today I learned that Julia is planning to have me committed to a nursing home so she can steal my jewelry and the money from my house. She's been lying to my doctor about my mental state, and she's going to use my son's love for me to convince him this is all for my own good. But I want it on record that I am not confused, I am not senile, and I am not going anywhere without a fight. The next morning, I waited until Julia left for her Pilates class, then called Ruth collect from the kitchen phone. I need help, I told her without preamble. Real help. Legal help. What happened, honey? I told her about Julia's phone conversation, about the plan to have me declared incompetent, about the jewelry and the money. Ruth listened in the same quiet way she had when we were kids, and I'd come to her with my problems. Helen, you need to know something, she said when I finished. I'm not just your old friend anymore. I went to law school after my kids graduated, specialized in elder law. I've been retired for 5 years, but I still keep my license active for cases like this. I actually laughed through my tears. Are you telling me my best friend is a lawyer? I'm telling you your best friend is a lawyer who's seen exactly this kind of abuse before and knows how to stop it. That afternoon, I copied everything, every page of my journal, every recording I'd made. I put it all in a manila envelope and walked to the mailbox at the end of the street while Julia was getting her hair done. As I dropped that package into the mail slot, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Ruth called me back 3 days later. Helen, what you've documented is criminal elder abuse, physical assault, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and criminal threats. I've been in touch with a prosecutor friend of mine who specializes in these cases, and she says you've got enough evidence to put Julia away for years. But what about Daniel? What about the children? I can't destroy their family. Honey, Julia already destroyed their family the day she decided to torture you. You're just going to make sure she faces the consequences. Ruth had a plan. It was going to take patience and perfect timing, but she promised me it would work. First, I had to keep documenting everything, keep recording, keep writing it all down. Second, I had to start acting like the broken old woman Julia wanted everyone to believe I was. I had to make her think she was winning. The hardest part was pretending to give up. When Julia suggested that maybe I'd be happier somewhere with people my own age who could take better care of me, I nodded sadly and said maybe she was right. When she mentioned that Shady Oaks was a lovely place where I wouldn't have to worry about being a burden anymore, I sighed and said I just wanted what was best for everyone. Julia's whole demeanor changed once she thought I was cooperating with my own destruction. She became almost pleasant, like a cat that stopped playing with a mouse because the mouse has stopped trying to escape. She'd pat my shoulder and tell Daniel how proud she was of me for being so reasonable about my future, how it showed real wisdom to accept that I needed more care than they could provide at home. Meanwhile, Ruth was building our case. She contacted the nursing home and discovered that Julia had never actually put me on a waiting list. She'd just been using the threat to control me. She reached out to my doctor and learned that Julia had been feeding him carefully crafted stories about my confusion and memory problems, but that there was nothing in my actual medical records to support a claim of incompetence. Most importantly, she found us allies, a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases, a detective who'd handled similar situations, a judge who had no tolerance for people who preyed on their own family members. The beautiful thing about bullies, Ruth told me during one of our secret phone calls, is that they never see the trap coming because they can't imagine their victims fighting back. Every day, I smiled at Julia. I thanked her for taking such good care of me. I told Daniel how grateful I was to have such a thoughtful daughter-in-law who was looking out for my best interests. I played the part of the grateful, declining old woman who knew her place and accepted her fate. And every night, I added more evidence to the case that was going to bring her down. She thought I was weak because I'd taken her abuse in silence for so long. She forgot that silence isn't the same thing as surrender. She forgot that I'd raised a good man by myself after my husband died, working 2 jobs and still making sure Daniel had everything he needed. She forgot that I buried the love of my life when I was barely 40 and found the strength to keep going because my son needed me to be strong. She'd mistaken my love for Daniel, my willingness to suffer rather than destroy his happiness, for weakness. But there's a difference between choosing your battles and being defeated. And Julia was about to learn that difference the hard way. The trap was set. The evidence was documented. The allies were in place. All that was left was waiting for exactly the right moment to spring it. Ruth's plan was elegant in its simplicity. She'd drive up from Mississippi for what she called an estate planning dinner, a chance for family to discuss my future and make sure everyone was on the same page about my care. Julia loved the idea because she thought it would give her a chance to present herself as the devoted daughter-in-law making difficult but necessary decisions about her declining mother-in-law. It'll be perfect, Julia told Daniel when Ruth called to arrange it. Having an outside perspective will help your mother understand that we're all just looking out for her best interests. What Julia didn't know was that Ruth hadn't come alone. The estate planning consultant she'd brought with her was actually Detective Sarah Martinez from the Elder Abuse Unit. The family mediator was Linda Chen, a social worker who'd been documenting cases like mine for 15 years. And that briefcase Ruth carried, it wasn't full of legal documents about my future. It was full of evidence about my past 5 years. They arrived on a Tuesday evening in May. Julia had spent the day cooking and cleaning, wanting to make the perfect impression. She'd even bought flowers for the dining room table and used her best china. Daniel came home early from work, and the children were sent to their rooms to do homework so the adults could talk privately. Ruth hugged me when she walked in, and for just a moment, I felt safe for the first time in months. She looked exactly the same as she had when we were girls, steel gray hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and that same quiet strength that had gotten us both through hard times before. "Helen, honey, you look wonderful," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Then quieter just for me, "Are you ready?" I nodded. I'd been ready for months. We gathered around the dining room table, Julia playing the perfect hostess, offering coffee, and the pound cake she'd made from scratch. Detective Martinez had set up a small recording device on the table, explaining it was standard procedure for estate planning discussions. Julia didn't even blink. She was so confident in her performance that she welcomed being recorded. "Before we talk about the future," Ruth said, settling into her chair and opening her briefcase, "I think we need to address some concerns that have come to my attention about Helen's current situation." Julia's smile never wavered. "Of course. I know this has been hard on Daniel, watching his mother's decline, but I've tried to document everything so we could make informed decisions." "Yes, you have documented quite a bit," Ruth agreed, pulling out a stack of papers. "Helen's been documenting things too." That's when Julia's face changed. Just slightly, just a tightening around her eyes, but I saw it. "I have here," Ruth continued, "detailed journals covering the past 18 months of Helen's life in this house, along with audio recordings of conversations, medical records, and photographic evidence of injuries." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Mrs. Patterson, we'd like to play some of these recordings for your son and daughter-in-law. Is that acceptable to you?" My voice came out steady and clear. "Yes, it is." The first recording was Julia's voice from just 2 weeks earlier. "You're nothing but a burden we're stuck with until you die." Daniel's face went white. Julia opened her mouth to speak, but Ruth held up a hand. "There's more." We listened to Julia threatening to make me disappear. We listened to her calling me senile and worthless. We listened to her phone conversation about the nursing home and the jewelry. With each recording, Daniel seemed to shrink further into his chair, and Julia's face grew paler. "These recordings are fake," Julia finally said, her voice shrill. "She's confused. She's making things up. Ask Dr. Morrison. He'll tell you about her mental state." Linda Chin spoke for the first time. "We did speak with Dr. Morrison. He said that his concerns about Helen's cognitive function were based entirely on information you provided to him. When we asked him to review Helen's actual test results and medical records, he found no evidence of dementia or significant cognitive decline." Ruth opened the journal and began reading entries aloud. Dates, times, exact descriptions of what Julia had done and said. She read about the locked refrigerator, the withheld meals, the physical assaults disguised as accidents. "Show them your arms, Helen," Ruth said gently. I rolled up my sleeves. The bruises had faded, but you could still see the finger-shaped marks on my wrists from where Julia had grabbed me just 3 days earlier for dropping a glass. Daniel finally found his voice. Julia, what is this? What have you done? I've taken care of your mother when she was too proud to admit she needed help. Julia shot back, but her composure was cracking. I've sacrificed my life for 5 years taking care of a woman who hates me, and this is the thanks I get. She's turned you all against me with lies. Detective Martinez stood up. Julia Patterson, you're under arrest for elder abuse, assault, criminal threats, and attempted financial exploitation. The next few minutes were chaos. Julia screamed that it was all lies, that I was senile and vindictive, that she'd been nothing but devoted to me. Daniel sat frozen at the table, staring at the bruises on my arms like he'd never seen them before. The children came running downstairs at the sound of their mother's voice, and Daniel had to hold them back while the detective put handcuffs on Julia and read her rights. As they led her away, Julia turned back to look at me one last time. The mask was completely gone now. Her face was full of pure hatred. This isn't over, you old bitch, she hissed. I'll destroy you for this. No, I said quietly, it is over, and you already tried to destroy me. It didn't work. The trial took 6 months. Julia hired an expensive lawyer who tried to paint me as a confused, vengeful old woman who'd fabricated evidence against her devoted caregiver. But Ruth had built an ironclad case. The recordings spoke for themselves. The medical evidence contradicted every claim Julia had made about my mental state. Character witnesses testified about the woman I'd been before I moved in with them. Sharp, independent, fully capable of managing my own life. Julia was sentenced to 4 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the money she'd stolen from my house sale and to stay away from me permanently once she was released. Daniel was devastated. He blamed himself for not seeing what was happening, for working such long hours, for trusting Julia completely. He moved out of the house with the children and filed for divorce while Julia was still awaiting trial. The hardest part was watching him struggle with loving me and hating himself for failing to protect me. I should have known, he kept saying during the awkward visits we had after everything came out. I should have seen the signs. Son, I told him, people like Julia are experts at hiding their true nature. She fooled me for months too, and I was the one living with it every day. The only person responsible for what she did is Julia herself. It took time for us to rebuild our relationship. Daniel had to work through his guilt, and I had to learn to trust that he wouldn't let anyone hurt me again. The children were confused and angry about their mother being gone, and it broke my heart to watch them struggle with missing the woman who'd hurt their grandmother. But we were family, and families heal if they're willing to do the work. I used the money from selling Daniel and Julia's house to buy a small cottage in Mississippi, just 2 miles from Ruth's place. It's nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a front porch with a swing, and a garden where I grow tomatoes and okra like my mama taught me. For the first time in 5 years, I have my own key to my own front door, and nobody can tell me when to eat or when to speak or when to leave my own house. Ruth and I have coffee every morning on one of our porches, taking turns hosting. We talk about everything and nothing the way old friends do. Sometimes we talk about what happened with Julia, but mostly we talk about the present and the future. At our age, we've learned that yesterday's pain doesn't have to poison today's peace. I started volunteering at the women's shelter in town, though most people don't know that's where I go twice a week. I help with intake interviews for older women who've been abused by their families. I listen to their stories, help them understand that what happened to them wasn't their fault, and show them the documentation methods that saved my life. There are more women like me than people realize, mothers and grandmothers who've been beaten and threatened and gaslit by the very people who should protect them. My journal became something I never expected. Ruth convinced me to work with a writer to turn my entries into a book. We called it The Quiet Rebellion, One Woman's Fight Against Elder Abuse. It's not a bestseller or anything fancy, but it's helped other families recognize the warning signs and given other victims the courage to speak up. Every few months, I get a letter from someone who read the book and saw themselves in my story. Last week, a woman in Texas wrote to tell me that my book helped her realize her son-in-law was financially abusing her, and she used my documentation methods to build a case against him. Another letter came from a man whose mother was being isolated and emotionally tortured by his sister, and he was able to get help before the situation escalated to physical abuse. Those letters remind me why I fought back. Not for revenge against Julia. Revenge would have been bitter and empty. I fought for peace. Peace of mind, peace in my own home, peace with my family, and peace with myself. Daniel and I talk on the phone every Sunday now. The children visit during school breaks, and slowly they're getting to know the real me again instead of the broken woman Julia wanted them to see. Sarah's in high school now and writes me letters about her classes and friends. Tommy's getting tall and gangly and still likes me to read to him when he visits, though now it's adventure stories instead of picture books. They're good kids who were caught in a terrible situation they didn't create and couldn't understand. But children are resilient, and love heals more wounds than people give it credit for. I'm 81 now. My hands are more wrinkled, my hair is whiter, and I need reading glasses to see small print. But I'm not weak, I'm not confused, and I'm not anyone's victim. I'm a survivor who learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is document the truth and wait for the right moment to reveal it. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And I finally found it with my hands that wrote down every injustice, my pen that recorded every truth, and a little bit of faith that justice would come if I was patient enough to wait for it. The quiet rebellion succeeded because it was never about fighting back loudly. It was about refusing to be erased one carefully documented day at a time. If you're listening to this and something in my story sounds familiar, if you recognize the signs I missed or the threats I endured, please know that you're not alone. Maybe it's not a daughter-in-law. Maybe it's an adult child, a caregiver, a spouse, or someone else who's supposed to love and protect you. Maybe you're living in fear right now, walking on eggshells in your own home, wondering if you're losing your mind or if what's happening to you is real. It's real, and it's not your fault. I want you to start writing things down, just like I did. Get a notebook, hide it somewhere safe, and document every incident. Write down dates, times, what was said, what was done. If you can safely record conversations, do it. If someone threatens you, write down their exact words. If someone hurts you, take pictures of the injuries if you can. This isn't about planning revenge. It's about preserving the truth. Find someone you trust. Maybe it's an old friend like my Ruth. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's someone at your church or your doctor's office. Elder abuse thrives in isolation, but it can't survive when other people know what's happening and care enough to help. There are resources out there that I didn't even know existed when I was living through this. The National Elder Abuse Hotline can connect you with local services and advocates. Adult protective services in your area can investigate and intervene. Legal aid societies can help you understand your rights and options. You don't have to fight this battle alone. And if you're watching this because you're worried about someone else, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Ask direct questions. Offer to help in concrete ways. Sometimes the person being abused can't ask for help themselves because they're too afraid of what might happen if they speak up. I'm telling you my story because the world needs to know that this happens, not just to strangers, not just to people in nursing homes or bad families, but to regular people living with people they trusted. It happens to women who raised children and buried husbands and survived everything life threw at them, only to be destroyed by someone who was supposed to care for them. But here's what I learned. Abuse thrives in silence, but resistance can too. Sometimes the quietest rebellion is the most powerful one. Sometimes documenting the truth is more effective than shouting it from rooftops. Sometimes patience and planning can accomplish what anger and confrontation never could. To help us keep spreading these meaningful stories, please support the Grandparents Archives channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with your loved ones. I want to sincerely thank the founder of Grandparents Archives for giving me this opportunity to share my experience. Stay tuned for more touching stories on Grandparents Archives. And thank you all. I'll see you again. With love, Grandma Helen.